Yes, in a word. I think that I agreed with the premise of that question also. I think the tax administration system is a bigger and bigger mess the closer you get to basically the middle of Manhattan geographically. Westchester is really bad and a hodgepodge, an indefensible patchwork system. Nassau is horrific in its own way. Sharing the basic structure of New York City, which those of you from New York City know, is really, really bad. And of course, the political concern, which I don't have to worry about, but what you do, is that whenever you seek to go into and modernize and streamline a tax administration system and make it more fair, there are losers as well as winners. The losers take notice sooner and scream louder. But there's a huge, huge problem with the administration of property taxes, downstate in particular. Statewide, I would suggest to you offhand that for a fraction of what you're spending on targeted tax breaks for homeowners, just what you did last year, the state could take the lead in modernizing property tax assessments and creating an information technology and training system to create a system where you'd have county level tax administration. And again, speaking of Massachusetts, Massachusetts has county level tax assessment updated every 3 years, which would be a revolutionary improvement for the suburbs of New York. Again, the city, as you know, we could be here all day talking about the really weird unintended outcomes and inequities of that system, which requires its own reform.
I think the Assembly actually had a almost all-day hearing on the city property tax system recently. Yeah. So I wasn't going to try to use my few minutes to go into that, but I did raise the question earlier with the tax commissioner because I do think there is so much we can do at the state level, and I didn't really get, to be honest, the answer I was hoping to hear. So I was hoping I might hear it from you. So
well, I agree, and I'm assuming in his defense, again, that's a policy perspective that has to begin higher up. But I also agree with the premise of that question.
Thank you very much.
Well,
thank you. One question. Sal Weprin, flat tax, 29 years ago?
No, Mel Miller.
Oh, Mel Miller, he was before that, 29.
It was when he took, that was his initiative, you may recall it, when he replaced Saul.
Okay.
Denny, just...
Or not Saul, when he was before Saul. Sorry, yes.
Just a very quick question. Have you done an analysis on the New York City taxing situation and come up with a plan?
No, I think that there have been excellent, between the IBO and the Citizens Budget Commission and a conference they held on the subject a couple of years ago, I think the path to what really would be the best reform is clear. I just think what's lacking is the will to get there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ron Deutsch, Executive Director, Fiscal Policy Institute.
Welcome.
Thank you, Chairpersons Farrell and Young, and I'd like to thank the distinguished members of the committee for the opportunity to speak with you here today. I know I'm going to have to do the Reader's Digest abbreviated version of my testimony. I gave it to you. You can read it at your leisure. I don't need to read it to you today, so I just wanted to touch on a number of different issues, if I could, that were touched on here today. I certainly agree with my friend E.J. McMahon, who spoke before me, that, and don't take this as a big shock, but the $340 million in throughway toll credits, I don't agree with. I also agree that those should be reprogrammed. Infrastructure is always a good investment, but I also think that that $340 million could be directed into anti-poverty initiatives, which are only funded at $25 million as part of the $2.3 billion bank surplus. So that might be a better use, potentially, of that money. Surprisingly, I don't agree with many of his other assertions. But what I would suggest is I want to discuss three things. One is the 2% state spending cap. The other is the education tax credit. And finally, the personal income tax surcharge is set to expire in 2017. So with regard to the 2% state spending cap, I think we're artificially keeping spending low right now. Total tax receipts, adjusted gross income, personal income growth are all expected to grow between 4% and or 6% over the next 4 to 5 years. yet we're artificially keeping spending below 2%. This obviously is nothing in statute. This is a self-imposed 2% spending cap. And while that may sound good to some people to control spending, the result, if you look in the financial plan, is out-year cuts into the magnitude of around $10 billion through 2020. Most of those cuts right now are unspecified. We don't even know what we're going to be cutting, but we know in order to stay below this 2% cap, we're going to have to cut those. So I would suggest that we would be able to make room for a lot of spending in the budget, and the governor lays out a lot of ambitious spending plans. We'd be able to fund those a little bit better if we were to lift that 2% state spending cap. With that said, let me move to the education tax credit, because I believe you're going to hear from a number of people who are greatly in support of this tax credit. Myself, I look at the governor's proposal and I look at the Senate proposal, and I would say that this is misguided tax policy. I would suggest that the $150 million in the governor's proposal and the $225 million in the Senate proposal both are excessive and provide very excessive tax credits of 75% in the governor's proposal and 90% in the Senate proposal to wealthy individuals or individuals and corporations that want to reduce their tax liability by donating money for scholarship funds. So I know this is being done under the guise of we're trying to give poor students a better education. I'm all for that as well. I want to give poor students a better education. But I think a better use of this money would be to invest it in the Community Schools Initiative. Kids in our priority and or struggling and or failing schools, whatever we're labeling them today, have some very common characteristics. 83% are in economically disadvantaged families, 78% free and reduced price school lunch, 12% or so are English as a second language learners, 9 out of 10 are living in minority communities. So those are the issues that need to be addressed if we want to provide a better education and better educational outcomes. 50% child poverty rates in our upstate cities. First of all, that's unconscionable. Second of all, the 50% child poverty rates in Rochester, Buffalo, Syracuse mirror approximate 50% graduation rates in those same cities and school districts as well. So I would suggest there's a strong correlation between poverty and educational outcomes that needs to be addressed, and we need to make sure that our priority schools get the resources they need to provide a quality education. So I know that this is being done to say that we need to provide low-income students with better educational opportunities, but in the case of the governor's bill, you can get a scholarship if your family income is up to $250,000, and in the case of the Senate bill, you get a scholarship if your income is up to $500,000 in your family. I don't think that that's a poor, I don't think that those are scholarships going to children in poor families. So I would question the wisdom of this tax credit, and I would also suggest that you're really giving up your duty as elected officials to direct state tax dollars for educational purposes and giving it over to private individuals and corporations. So finally, I would say that the income tax surcharges that were put in place through 2017 are set to expire. I'm proud to say that Assemblyman Farrell, you released a bill today that in fact restores a great deal of progressivity to our personal income tax structure. I disagree with EJ in suggesting that we're putting too much pressure on the wealthy. In reality, the wealthiest 1% in New York City get about 39% of all the income in New York City. So it's no wonder that they pay a large percentage of the personal income tax. It's simply by function of the fact that they control the majority of the income. So that's something you need to consider as well. So what we would suggest is, and we've put out our own plan today as well, and it somewhat mirrors the plan that you put forward, Assemblyman. And we thank you for that, but we would propose income tax brackets starting at over $665,000, which represents the top 1% or so of New Yorkers. So we would add some additional brackets, and you can see this on page 9 of my testimony, the bracket structure that we're proposing, so that it goes from those earning $665,000 a year up to $1 million would see their rate go from 6.85% to 7.65%. Those earning between $1 million and $2 million would see their rate go to 8.82%. And those earning between 2 and 10 million, 9.35%, between 10 and 100 million, 9.85%, and above 100 million, 9.9%. Now, those rates are below or similar to states such as California, Oregon, Minnesota. So this is not anything that's out of the realm of reason. We certainly think that given the fact that the wealthiest New Yorkers have seen literally all the income gains since the Great Recession and are doing quite well, and as some of you have already noted, the number of millionaires in New York is growing, it's not shrinking. So these folks aren't leaving in droves as a result of the current 8.82% rate. I would suggest that we would be better served by increasing top tax rates and making them permanent, so we have a permanent structure in place. And we know exactly how much revenue generally we'll be getting on a year-to-year basis, rather than continuing to toy around with temporary rates that expire at any given point in time. Because the financial plan itself reflects the fact that the income tax surcharges that are in place right now will be expiring. So I think we'd be better served to take that money, and under our plan, we actually generate about $2.3 billion while maintaining $1 billion in the quote-unquote middle-class tax cuts that were enacted by the legislature and the governor in 2011. So I think that those funds could be used to certainly lower property taxes, which I would suggest are the true burden of taxation for middle-class families. If you look at who pays taxes as a percentage of income in New York State, you find that the wealthiest 1% pay a much smaller percentage of their income in state and local taxes than do the middle 3 quintiles, let's say. So I would suggest that the folks in the middle that are paying anywhere from 11 to 12% of their income in state and local taxes are the ones that really need a tax break. And to address one of the questions you raised, Senator Kruger, regarding some of the business subsidies, the Solomon McCall Tax Commission, there was a report that Peter Solomon commissioned by Donald Boyd and Marilyn Rubens that really suggested that these business tax credits were simply pure folly and weren't needed. So if you were to eliminate those $2 billion or so in tax credits and subsidies, I would suggest you could virtually eliminate the entire local share of Medicaid for upstate New York, which would go a long way to reduce property taxes for a vast majority of New Yorkers and for businesses at the same time. So you want to couple that with $8 billion in economic development spending that goes to dubious programs and or job creation promises. I would suggest that there's plenty of money within our existing budget to lower property taxes across the board in a way that's very responsible, and also make sure that we're not putting undue pressure on our local governments and on our schools, as we are doing right now with the local property tax cap, given the fact that it's at 0.12%, virtually at zero right now, which is going to result in hundreds of millions in lost revenue at the local level. So I will end there. I appreciate your time and be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Senator Kruger. Oh, I'm sorry, somebody's first. Okay.
Thank you, Ron. So the new proposal that you're making today, which apparently is parallel to the Assembly proposal, which, since we've all been in here, perhaps we didn't have a chance to see that one. So looking at your chart, we're increasing the taxes for people. We're keeping the quote-unquote, I hated the term millionaire's tax, so I don't even like to use it, but we're keeping that in place after the sunset clause, and then we're increasing a variety of new categories above $665,000. Is that what you were suggesting?
Yes.
Okay. And that's going to bring in, you project an additional $2.2 billion, or the whole thing staying in place plus the addition above
The
the
changes that we would propose at the top end would bring in an additional $2.3 billion while maintaining $1 billion in quote-unquote middle-class tax cuts for folks under $300,000 a year.
So some people always say if you raise the taxes on the highest income people, they won't actually live here anymore. I happen to represent, I think, the wealthiest district in the state, and actually I can tell people they're sort of pretending they're not living here now. They, by disproportionate numbers, are defining themselves as living out of state one day more than half of the year. I have in my district huge numbers of new buildings that are purchased but empty because, and they're apartments that you couldn't possibly afford unless you were in the top 1%. But they're empty because people aren't living there. I'm just wondering, do you think there's any legitimacy to the argument that our changing our tax policies are actually going to change the behaviors of people, or aren't many of them doing it already anyway?
Yeah, I guess I would suggest that, you know, for all the folks that have been naysayers about these income tax surcharges over the years, certainly the number of millionaires since we've instituted the surcharges have been growing, not shrinking. People are making their millions in New York. They're not going to flock to Mississippi to make that same amount of money, the same way that profitable businesses in New York, despite the tax foundation rankings, aren't moving to Wyoming, which they suggest is the #1 state in terms of business friendliness. So the reality is there's a huge consumer base here in New York that are purchasing goods and services, and these businesses are making lots of money in New York State, so they'll stay here. The wealthy are making their money in New York State, so they will stay here as well. We actually worked with a group called Responsible Wealth a couple of years ago where we had 100 extremely wealthy people, New Yorkers as a matter of fact, sign a letter saying that these income tax surcharges would in no way, shape, or form affect their quality of life, and that they wanted to be more helpful and part of a solution to better funding our schools, to better funding public services. So they were fine with the extension of the income tax surcharges.
And following up on my story, which may be relatively unique to a certain number of districts, is there any way to capture more tax income from people who live in New York State one day short of half the year, use our services, participate in all the great things that we have, but then somehow seem to avoid taxes that so many of us other people pay?
Yes, I mean, I think, you know, the Fiscal Policy Institute has made some proposals in the past for what we would call a pied-à-terre tax, you know, that large condo or, you know, multi-million-dollar dwelling that out-of-state residents purchase, and we would suggest that there be a modest tax placed on those as well in order to help ensure that those folks are paying for services that are provided throughout the city and or the state. So I think there's ways to do that that make sense, and we've certainly proposed them in the past and stand by those.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Joseph Elbow, Jr., President of New York State Society of Certified Public Accountants.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I think. Good afternoon, possibly.
Good afternoon,
yes.
yes.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, members of the Assembly and the Senate. My name is Joe Falvo, and as mentioned, I am the president of the New York State Society of Certified Public Accountants. The New York State Society of CPAs is one of the largest accounting organizations in the country, representing more than 28,000 professionals that live and work in New York State. Among the regulated professionals, CPAs have the strongest connection to the state's vast and diverse economy. I suggest there is not a sector of business in the state that does not engage with a member of the accounting profession. At the Society, we foster this widespread connection by engaging 15 regional chapters and more than 60 technical committees. Our clients see us as their trusted advisors, engaged to help them navigate the difficult road that is at times, as you've heard this morning, doing business in New York State. At the New York State Society, we strive to navigate and make that easier by working with leaders like you to ensure that our members and their clients are treated in a reasonable and equitable fashion. I think we've heard both sides of that story already this morning. The New York State Society directly and actively engages with more than a dozen regulatory agencies throughout the country and the world by providing a real-time technical feedback to their proposals. As a New York State licensed CPA and the Society's chief voluntary leader, I speak on behalf of the organization and the profession at large when I say certified public accountants are willing, able, and ready to partner for progress as you lead our state. I greatly appreciate the opportunity you've afforded me this morning to testify during the tax portion of this hearing, and I've come prepared to speak on a number of specific items, some of which you've already heard this morning, so I'll make an attempt to give you the abbreviated version. But I'd like to begin more broadly. CPAs have firsthand experience of how the changes in the tax code that you've heard about this morning and the business outcomes they drive. When tax changes are proposed and ultimately passed into law, it's up to the CPA often to interpret what you as our leaders have set into motion. In the most practical sense, we are the ones who must apply and explain the ever-changing rules and regulations to our clients and the taxpayers. We are the technicians in your community. It is heartening to see attempts being made to simplify and unify New York's tax code as outlined in Governor Cuomo's executive budget. To state the obvious, tax simplification is a very complex phenomenon. You've already heard that this morning. I need not tell you this. The paradox in the phrase tax simplification is a battle to be fought and won when designing and redesigning our tax code. Simplification is a word that means many different things to different people. As I've said, you've heard that from the previous two speakers. The differences are often significant and not subtle. Simplification takes on completely different meaning based on each constituency's perspective. Simplification can lead to lower taxes through higher compliance rates. Taxes collected are equal to taxes imposed multiplied by tax compliance rates. It follows that the higher the compliance rate, the lower the tax rate required, yielding the same funding for our government. There are areas where double taxation issues can be eliminated for dual state residents, and I think this is something that the Senator was alluding to in her district. As you may know, residents who work or conduct business in more than one state currently face a myriad of tax regulations. We believe improvements in this area can increase compliance. If I may, I'd like to draw a parallel to my U.S.-Canada cross-border practice in Buffalo. I can assure you that it is much easier for me to discuss the income tax filing requirements with my clients from two different countries than it is for me to discuss filing in two different states when New York is one of those states. The reason being, the federal tax treaty currently in place with Canada, in its most fundamental sense, is rooted in the most basic of concepts. Simply said, no taxpayer will pay tax on the same dollar of income to more than one taxing authority. A fairly simple concept, I believe. Ladies and gentlemen, with the utmost respect to this governing body, pursuit of this very basic concept is the tax simplification all taxpayers seem to understand, appreciate, and I've seen in my practice are willing to actively comply with. In reviewing Governor Cuomo's proposed executive budget, we would like to extend our support to the changes outlined in Part Q, which seek to unify tax due dates, and encourage the legislature to follow suit in their budget proposals. The New York State Society of CPAs began to advocate for these changes in 2011. The spirit in which these recommendations are made is that taxpayers and tax preparers want to prepare and file complete and accurate tax and information returns. The prior due date structure made it difficult and in some cases impossible to do so. The resulting inadvertent and sometimes unavoidable lack of compliance does not encourage participation in our tax filing system. We recognize that there's no perfect solution. However, We believe that there's a more logical ordering that will facilitate and ultimately the ultimate goal of preparing and filing complete and accurate tax and information returns. As you already heard this morning from Mr. McMahon, estate taxes are on the minds of New Yorkers. I would also like to take this opportunity to talk about the Society's position on the recent estate tax reform New York undertook and how it can be further enhanced to truly provide improved equitability to all New Yorkers. We applaud the 2014-15 budget efforts to enhance New York's competitiveness compared to other states. The overall objective of this move was noted by Governor Cuomo in January 2014 State of the State address when he said, "Let's eliminate the move to die tax," where people literally leave our state and move to another state to do estate plan. While the changes made that year have been tremendously beneficial, the way in which it ultimately was implemented has left us with a few serious flaws that need to be corrected, as you've heard. Chiefly among those concerns is the tax cliff, and as the tax practitioner in the room, I'm going to attempt to give you some real numbers. Simply put, an estate of $5,512,500 will receive the current exemption, which we appreciate being elevated to $5,250,000, leaving a taxable estate of $262,500. This taxable estate of just over $250,000 in New York will yield an estate tax liability of $430,000. As you heard this morning, 164% of your taxable income. This is not a hypothetical example for my testimony. This is the real math of how it works. This tax cliff goes against any rational hope of making New York State a more favorable environment for its residents planning the later stages of their lives. We also heard from the Senator that there are folks that can afford to move outside the state. And it's unfortunate as a CPA that I am professionally and ethically bound to advise my clients that moving from our state is a valid wealth preservation strategy. As a lifelong New Yorker, that causes me great pain to have to make that recommendation, I'll be honest with you, but that's the fact of the matter. We have a series of technical corrections to multiple estate tax issues that we have already begun discussing with New York Department of Taxation and Finance. The Society would be happy to meet with any of you to provide further details regarding the technical aspects of our recommendations. In closing, I would like to say on behalf of the New York State Society of Certified Public Accountants, and personally it's a privilege and an honor to testify before you, we welcome the opportunity to engage further on the tax issues I've addressed, or in any way you feel that the State Society may be of assistance. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Senator.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Yes.
So yes, as a tax planner, you may be advising clients to move out of New York State, and I understand the tax upon death, but I hate calling it the death tax, the estate tax issue, and the cliff issue. I actually do understand that. But going back to the other question that I had asked Ron Deutsch from FPI, as a tax professional,
Yes.
where you will need to recommend to your clients whatever I suppose is the lowest taxes for them. But as a New Yorker who cares about New York, what can we do to recognize that people really are living here 50% of the time, and they are often avoiding taxes
Certainly.
that we need as a state, but they've made the decision that when they look at their tax options with their professional, and they just keep a careful count or hope nobody else keeps a careful count of how many days they're here and not here, we end up losing a significant amount of revenue. What would you recommend to us that we can do to help keep this revenue here? Because I think we're actually keeping the people here much of the time.
No question. From a practitioner standpoint, we are keeping the people here, and the state has much to offer, so they don't want to leave. We hear from our clients that they feel forced to leave, and unfortunately, up until last year, they wanted to leave before they passed away, even quicker because our exemption was over $1 million. With regard to specific recommendations, I don't know that I would have the time to go into them today, but we are meeting with Tax and Finance to go through our plans. one of the potential opportunities is to apportion income for individuals in a manner that we do for businesses based on where the income is earned. We're in a progressively mobile society, and income is earned in a specific location. It is sourced. There are nexus issues and there are sourcing issues, much like the federal taxing authority sources income with permanent establishments and the like. There is the potential for doing this for individuals, but it's going to require additional study and analysis to make sure that that would make sense. And then the number of days issue would not even be relevant. There would be sourcing income from where the revenue was earned.
So might you have something to share with me outside of the hearing?
Absolutely.
Time limits?
Absolutely.
I would appreciate it very much.
Gladly.
Thank you.
Be happy to do so.
We've been joined by Senator Phil Boyle.
Assemblyman Braunstein.
Thank you. I chair the subcommittee on trust and estates, and we've been trying to tackle the cliff, the estate tax cliff, for a few years now. And I appreciate the fact that you recognize that if eliminating the cliff entirely is not tenable, you propose smoothing it out, which is where we've ran into trouble. We found that eliminating the cliff would be expensive. And that's where we've had problems. So just in the future, I just want to let you know I'm going to be reaching out to you, and hopefully we can construct something where we can smooth it out, and hopefully we can have something proposed this year. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
And we appreciate that, Assemblyman, and we appreciate the meetings that you've had with the committee chair. One of those 60 committees I referenced has made several trips and has met with you and some of your staffers, and we appreciate having a seat at that table and provide our input from a practitioner standpoint. So thank you for involving us in the process.
Further?
All set. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Darla Rumfo, President and CEO of Children's Scholarship Fund, and Darrell Bradford, President, New York Coalition for Achievements